I've got some more House of the Dragon news. Before I get into it, you'll be surprised to know that the actor I'm going to be talking about today doesn't think she's made a mark on the audiences just yet. But she's one of the most hated characters in the series so far. It's none other than Alicent Hightower, played by the incredible Olivia Cooke. Her performance as the older version of Alicent has been praised by both fans and critics alike, and she's definitely one of the many gems among the highly talented cast. She doesn't seem to think so though. Cooke recently appeared on In the Envelope podcast and talked about how she didn't think the viewers were too happy with her. She said that even though she had been trying her very best to give her character everything so she can make a more nuanced performance, ultimately, not everyone was pleased with it. She admitted to adding a few things to her character that weren't necessarily part of the original text or the scripts, but she'd done it to justify the Queen's actions and emotions. And we can't blame her for that, can we? She specifically talked about the Driftmark scene when she pulled the cat's paw dagger at Rhaenyra, and about how exhausted she was because of all the emotions she had to push into the scene. She talked about that scene being their first big emotional scene that lasted over a few days, by the end of which she was like, oh, this job is going to require a lot of stamina. No kidding. On a show like House of the Dragon, you really need to give it your all, especially when you're surrounded by such big names in Hollywood. You can't really afford to give a lackluster performance in even a single scene. And even after all that effort, people still have something to say. Olivia Cooke's experience with that wasn't any different. When she appeared at the Power Woman Summit alongside actors like Amy Lou Wood, Xochitl Gomez, Haley Lou Richardson, and Tommy Dorfman, Cooke spoke about going through Twitter after the show had aired to see fans' reactions to her performance in the character. Seeing as her character was often at odds with Rhaenyra, the protagonist, the comments weren't all that great. People can get way too serious about fictional stories. Cooke explained the extent to which it bothered her to see fans picking her character apart with little to no remorse. She talked about how mean most people were with their comments and how she rarely came across something nice. She said, I was a bit depressed and didn't want to leave the house for a while. No one deserves that, especially not someone like Olivia Cooke. Hating Alicent Hightower comes easy to most viewers, and it's about to get worse. Season 2 is all set to bring on a lot more hate for the poor queen, while Season 1 took us through the origins of the Dance of the Dragons between rival factions of the Targaryen family. The next season is going to be all about the war that followed. A quick refresher, the children of the deceased king have split into competing factions, all fighting for the throne. On one side, you've got the Greens, consisting of the allies of Viserys' second wife, Alicent Hightower. Then on the other side, you've got the Blacks, consisting of those aligned with Viserys' chosen heir, his daughter Rhaenyra, and her husband-uncle, Daemon. It's a lot to take in if you hadn't been following the show closely. I know. In the season finale, the death of Rhaenyra's son, Lucerys, at the hands of his uncle Aemon, is going to kick off the battle between the two sides once and for all. And you know what that means. More fighting between the two former BFFs, Rhaenyra and Alicent. You thought you'd seen the worst of it? Well, it's about to get a whole lot worse. And I'm guessing no one is about to go any easier on Alicent either. That was just a bit of a summary of everything that went down in the first season. There was so much more, but I can't even begin to cover it. But I'll try anyway. Let's start with that brutal scene with the internet's boyfriend and his on-screen wife. Yep, I'm talking about episode 5, when Daemon returns to the Vale and meets with his wife, Rhea, who is fully prepared to verbally drag him, and nobody blames her. Throughout the scene, he doesn't speak a single word. No, of course not. That wouldn't be very Daemon of him. Instead, he simply causes her horse to throw her off, injuring her, and then walks ominously towards her with a rock. You know, the kind you'd typically use for bashing a person's skull in. There's even a behind the scenes picture to show more of the scene. You don't see it happening, but you get to see Daemon towering over the poor woman with a big fat rock, preparing to bludgeon her to death. That was definitely one of the most brutal Daemon scenes we got in the last season. But it doesn't even scratch the surface. There's so much more that will make you gasp, cringe, and sometimes even cheer out loud over a terrible death or pain. Viserys' gross wounds, for instance. Sure, the gooey cut you first see on Viserys' back pales in comparison to what we see later, but it's still gross. We don't recommend watching this episode while eating. Even more so, if you're watching Daemon go off on one of his killing sprees. That one with him in the city watch, for example. There are shots with bloody body parts piled one on top of the other. Heads, arms, legs, you name it. Viewers are shown the city watch loading the human pieces onto a wagon. My only question is, why? Obviously, I know it's to send a clear message about crime and what happens to people who commit them in true Daemon fashion. The rest of the show isn't any less gory. The childbirth scenes are perhaps the most terrifying part of it. The queen's death in childbirth to begin with, brutal, heartbreaking, and way too cruel. Viewers are shown Queen Aemma in labor, and King Viserys is told about a new method of removing the child that will certainly kill the mother. He decides to try and save his male heir, ultimately choosing to kill his wife without her knowledge or consent. She's held down forcibly, given a C-section with zero medication, and bleeds until she dies. The worst part is, not even the child makes it. And that's not the last of the childbirth trauma. We get to see more of it after a significant time jump when Rhaenyra is giving birth to what most people believe is Laenor's son. Of course, the show depicts the scene extremely brutally. Even though she doesn't die, it's not fun to watch. She has moments to get up after the birth to present her child to the queen, and we see her literally leaving a trail of blood behind her. Yikes. And that's still not it. There's yet another brutal birth scene with Rhaenyra when she goes into premature labor after receiving the bad news about Aegon's installment as the king. It results in her giving birth to a stillborn daughter who she has to mourn alone because Daemon is way too busy being unhinged to care enough to be by his wife's side. That was all from my side on what we expect to see in Season 2. It's going to be quite a wait for the next season. See you in the next one.